Thanks, Dan. First, I want to again thank the organizing committee. I want to thank Ken for hatching this idea. Thank everyone for coming. People that haven't been thanked yet are the two women sitting down on the second floor. I think it's really remarkable. They come in all weekend. So if you get a chance on your way out, say thank you to them. I think they'd appreciate it. This is a paper with Jason Ruth and Tudo. Tudo is a PhD student in economics, doing the job market this year in marketing. In spite of reading many of your papers in my seminar. So there's two things to it. Smart, but I also question his judgment. Great. Yeah, so I'm Carl. Ignore this. I'm not really Ken. And I'm going to talk about advertising learning and direct advertising markets. Is this an IQ test?
It's probably not active.
Yeah, wrong. I think I'm on the wrong screen. So, let me talk a little bit about display advertising markets. Many of you, including me, have worked in exchange markets, but not so much with direct markets. Turns out advertising is distributed oftentimes through dual channels, even by the same publishers. And an ad network exists as a very fundamental sense to match advertisers to sites. So many sites out there, so many advertisers, how to match them. These markets have evolved to enable that. And there's two broad types, exchange and direct, although there's many flavors of these. So it's not quite as dichotomous as I painted here, but what we're typically familiar with marketing economics are exchange markets, right? So what happens is Sri will arrive on a website. As he arrives on the website, an impression is created. That impression is often matched with a bunch of tags, and that impression and those tags go to some centralized exchange. An auction occurs. Someone buys that impression based on the tags. Generally, it's a first price auction, and retail media is a second price auction, as on site. So that's how it's all done. The interesting thing about that, there's several interesting things. First, oftentimes you don't know the publisher you're buying because you're just buying an impression. Second, you're targeting at the impression level, single impression. Third, the pricing is done by auction. Again, many different flavors of these. And the transaction is per action. So it could be an impression, it could be a click, it could be a view. There's lots of ways to price this. Direct is a little different. Direct, I'm typically, a really good example of this is New York Times and The Guardian. You can buy what's called a top of the fold ad. Top of the fold is a really old expression. Newspapers used to be sold in newspaper machines, and they would be folded over, and what you could see is the ad on top. Okay, so it was above the fold. Really good inventory quality. That's typically what's sold through direct. And the way it works is someone will buy, say, a run of the site at The Guardian for a day, and they will pay a fee to do it with an expected number of impressions and clicks. They don't know it, they have an expectation. Targeting, in some sense, there is a name. You're buying a bundle. There's contextual targeting. You can buy different vehicles with different readerships, but it's still contextual targeting. The pricing is typically posted, so you know what you're going to pay. It's not an auction. It can be, again, there's many flavors, this can be, but generally is posted. And the transaction, again, is at a subscription level. So again, I subscribe to the site for a day, and that's what I do. So you can see that in very, very different formats. Here's a particular example I found from a newspaper in South Carolina. This isn't our data. This is something that was just lifted online, and what you see is, for example, and above the fold, $100 per month. It's 300 by 250 pixel, 30,000 impressions, $3 per thousand is the expected cost per impression, and it's limited to 3 advertisers. They probably rotate. Then on the side, our context has rotators predominantly, although rarely more than 1 advertiser at a site, sometimes 2 or 3 that I stopped with. And here, again, it's $80 per month with 50,000 impressions or $6 per thousand. So you get the idea. It's not like this is an auction. I'm pretty clear on the distinction between direct and exchange, and I'm going to go into why that's important relative to the research we've done. Yeah,
Isn't like it's 90% exchange with 90% of that being RTP, the direct is almost non-existent now?
Well, it all depends on whether you believe sites like eMarketer. Found result on the internet, but if you look, so it turns out around 2013, about 75% of stuff was sold through exchange. But now it's closer to 75% sold direct. And there's two big reasons for this. I think it's going to grow. First reason is, of course, brand safety. When I'm buying on exchange, I have no idea where my ad's going to appear. And that can lead to some real brand equity accidents. Okay. The second reason is cookie deprecation. So with cookie deprecation, it's just harder to know what you're buying with display. So we're going to see retail media and direct advertising should be pretty sustained and growing. So yeah.
But you can still do behavioral and contextual targeting.
Sorry, David?
Without cookies, you can still do behavioral and contextual targeting.
Yeah, but you do it in bulk. Right, so
Yeah.
if you go here, I buy, a month. So everybody goes for a month is going to see that ad. Now, this is a newspaper in coastal South Carolina, so if I want to target beachgoers, then this would be it's a contextual target. But it's not in per impression. So, the issue here is that advertisers, one of the real problems in this, Stu, is I just gave you one site, but a number of potential sites you can buy is enormous. They can run into thousands, certainly in the exchange we're looking at, that's true. And the ad success depends on the site where it's running. I don't really know what extent is. So I can pick many of these different things. So the advertiser's site match isn't known initially, but it's only revealed after the ad's run. And with that in mind, a couple of questions pop up. First, do advertisers learn which publisher site to select? Is there any evidence of advertisers learning in this world where somehow I have to pick something, and then upon picking something, my app performs, and then does my behavior change? So that's the first question.
Can you clarify the direct model? So I'm assuming also the publisher has some interest in picking specific type of advertising. It's not just the advertiser speaking the publisher.
It's not just what?
It's not just the advertiser that is speaking a specific publisher, but the publisher has some interest in having specific type of advertiser on there.
It could be. Typically, again, it's a fixed price, and whoever pays it, the publisher will.
Independently, whatever they. Okay.
That's me. So do advertisers learn? And if they do learn, are they pretty good at picking sites? Are their initial beliefs correct? That's an interesting question to me. And that raises the question if advertisers' beliefs aren't correct, and honestly, I don't know why they would be. This is a very hard problem. Do the publisher and network have an incentive to correct advertisers? So imagine, for example, let's imagine an advertiser is optimistic. So they buy an ad. Why would the publisher or the ad network on listing publisher sites ever inform the advertiser, oh, this ad doesn't work well, please don't give me your money. Right? So there's this real incentive issue. So if in fact there is an incentive, how can it be done? Like, is there a realistic approach to actually enabling better advertiser site match? And those are the research questions I'm going to roll. Okay. Yeah, so let me make one other point. It's not as though there aren't any papers on advertiser learning and display ad markets. They're typically an exchange thing. And the interesting thing about them is, so Srinivas got has a paper, for example, and he uses UCB approach essentially to help them find the best match. Okay. Very fact that his paper shows that advertisers use the UCB approach and they can improve suggests that advertisers aren't doing well initially. Right. But that is in an exchange market. What's different in a direct market, if I go back here, is I'm potentially buying many thousands of impressions. So in the display ad world, where we help advertisers find better matches to test and learn, it's all about testing. In this world, cold start becomes way more important. Why? Because I'm not buying an impression, I'm buying 100,000, a million impressions, and by the time I bought them, I've already spent a lot of money. So really, cold start matters here. In fact, in practice, after a few subscriptions, you probably learn pretty well match tiles. So I need to do something a little bit more with cold start than testing. Okay, so the guide for today is I'll start talking about the data, and I'll just say, like, is there any descriptive evidence of advertiser learning? Just looking at the data. And then to control for all sorts of observables and do counterfactuals, I'm going to outline a structural model of advertising demand and learning. And in that world, advertising and learn how well they match. That's the goal. Then, consistent with my research questions, I'm going to present some results and do some counterfactuals. First, I'm going to assess the impact of cost of learning on advertisers, publishers, and the network. But can we put a welfare value on this? Then I'm going to try to assess the role of the platform in information sharing. Can they help? And what are who wins and who loses? And then I'll just summarize with a big one button section of the paper. Right.
So typically when ads run multiple campaigns over time, each campaign has a specific goal, like national goal or domestic goal. So how should I think about this ad site match? Like, is it a static construct or like varies based on campaign to campaign?
Yeah, I'm going to abstract away from goals. I'm just going to say an advertiser will advertise if it's profitable. I'm going to back up their valuation. This is very similar to all the work in exchange advertising, where you're trying to impute an advertiser valuation. Right. So in the data, this is a small ad network with a vertical specialization in blogs. One thing that's cool is we observe this from their inception. Right, and if I want to model learning and get priors, I need to observe the first interaction. We choose out of this broad data set in papers on depth how a locally dense cluster of 165 local political blogs. What I mean by locally dense cluster, when we look at the advertisers advertising these blogs, they tend not to advertise outside these blogs. So it's a contained market, kind of like in the old scanner data where you figure out what is a category. So we're going to look at that. We're going to pick the top 20 of 165 liberal political blogs by revenue and a random sample of 100 advertisers, but the results are pretty robust. Message doesn't much changes. Some predictable changes, but the basic message stays. What to know about ads in this network? Similar to the example I showed you, they run on a subscription base. So you have a start date, a duration, and prices paid. 17% of these subscriptions ran less than a week, about 53% for 2 weeks, 12% for 3 weeks, and 13% more. A typical subscription, you'd be paying $100, and you would get 821,000 impressions. And pretty consistent with all the other games, you see click-through rates around 0.5% Seems pretty stable over time to kill.
Just going back to those slides back, when you show that the direct market is increasing, even in a world where there's no cookies and no targeting, still seems like the exchange market is so much more superior because at least I can iterate on the websites that I'm done. So why is it that the direct market is increasing?
Yeah, the data won't let me answer that question. I can answer like an economist and say, if exchange was so much better, I'd be seeing 90% of ad volumes for exchange. Part of it again is brand safety. But part of it might be because you can just work with first party data on these sites. I really don't know.
Well, I mean, I think there are also studies estimating that around 45 cents out of every dollar in those exchange markets are going to intermediaries. So that's a very big savings, right? But I wonder to what degree advertisers use the exchange market to learn about publisher quality in order to enter into direct deals, which is probably outside of what you're doing, but
Yeah.
maybe not irrelevant.
So Ken's point is super interesting. It turns out, right, a lot of publishers sell inventory both direct and exchange. They tend to sell their best inventory direct, but this raises a really interesting allocation question. Like I don't have time to run off on this, but I think it's a super interesting question. That is, how should the advertisers think about allocating inventory? It turns out it's a very hard problem. Some theorists in economics have worked on this, like Santiago Balsero. It's called dynamic allocation. And there's some burgeoning work, but I see no empirical work in this space yet. So so this distills down to about 40,000 advertiser site week level choice occasions, and 547 ad purchases. Remember, this is when we say an advertiser is making a choice, it means in any given week they have to choose which site, and how long in duration. That's the choice product that I'm gonna be modeling. And then we have the display ad copy images, and I'll tell you why they're important later. They're gonna be helpful for solving this. Okay, so what would be evidence of advertiser learning? Reach so the necessary condition for learning is that ads placed on different sites have different performance. If ads had the same performance on every site, there's nothing to learn. So that's the first thing we want to check. The second thing is, if advertisers are learning, when something works, they do it again. When it doesn't work, the advertiser doesn't do it again. So another piece of empirical data we can look at is, does advertiser behavior change in the face of success and failure? And then finally, when we think about learning models in general, what we see is people start with their prior build, they converge to something. So do we see the advertiser behaviors converge to something? In this case, it would mean a stable set of advertisers, or a stable set of publisher sites that they choose on publish. That's the idea. So first question, do some sites perform better than the others? On the x-axis, I'm plotting the average advertiser publisher click-through rate across publishers. This is just a PDF. The PDF is broken by the orange being very large publishers and small publishers, and blue being large publishers, but across all publisher sizes, there's a lot of heterogeneity in how ads do in terms of click-through rates. So there is difference in ad performance. The second question was, again, do advertisers respond to feedback? And so I have two densities plotted here. On the left in blue, I have the density of advertisers again with these publishers. So I'm going to take those advertisers who advertised again. I'm going to take those advertisers that didn't advertise again. And I'm just going to plot the distribution of median realized cost per clicks. So it turns out the median cost per click on sites where advertisers gave up is $3, and where they continued it's 82 cents. So again, this is suggestive that advertisers are internalizing feedback. That's the second piece of data. On this plot, I'm getting at the third question about convergence. And so what you see on the x-axis is the week since the advertiser entered the sample. So the very first time they appear in our data is week 1, and this is a log scale here out to half a year. On the y-axis is the average number of publishers with ads running. So in other words, how many publishers is the advertiser choosing in that particular condition on the time since they have set. These bars on top are just how many advertisers we observe that have been with someone. So things get noisier to the right because of survival, but the basic point to take here is that advertisers start out with 6 sites on average, and then after 26 weeks, they've distilled that down to about 3. I could also look at the set of selected sites. And so again, here I have going from week 1 to week 2, going from week 9 to week 10. The question is, how much of those sets of sites overall? So again, think of, I chose 5 advertisers in week 1, 5 advertisers in week 2. If they're perfectly aligned, I should have some set measure that's 1. If they're completely disjoint, I should have some set measure that's 0. We use the Jacquard index. You could use cosine similar. It really doesn't matter. The main point is we see an increase in the set overlap from weeks to weeks. So what's happening is advertisers are starting with a large number of sites. They're getting to a smaller number of stable sites. And that's sort of the data evidence for learning. So before going to model, I'll stop here if there's any questions. Down there?
Can I clarify how to think about the cost per click descriptive? Like, is that the right thing to compare? Because maybe it's high cost, but high conversion probability, isn't it more like accurate to look at the conversion probabilities or some like metrics of quality of this traffic?
Yeah, so we don't observe whether, remember, our data come from an ad network. So we observe whether advertisers click. We don't observe what happens after those clicks. I can say this, in most instances, click-through rates are correlated with conversions. But I agree, a down funnel measure would be.
But you observe click-through rates. So then, no, why? So what's the kind of trade-off in costs?
We could use, yeah,
versus rate?
we could use click-through rates too, but we wanted to normalize for costs. Yeah. Okay, so the demand model overview, just a refresher. At each site, an advertiser must decide whether to run an ad and for how many weeks. And our assumption is they're going to try to maximize net payoff of those impressions that they purchase. And so this gets at your question, Brian. I think the model will be a little bit more what we're actually measuring. The choice options again are 1, 2. We use the most common ones, which are 1 week, 2 weeks, and a month. And the prices for each duration are posted. And it turns out they don't depend on impressions or clicks. In the paper, we go through a lot of checks about things like crowding, demand, and how affects prices. Interesting thing in our data is prices do not change over the entire duration of the data at. So advertisers match with sites are unknown at first, but they're allowed to have a prior belief about a match to affect their first ad buy. We're not going to assume that advertisers are correct. And we're going to assume that ad performance in terms of click-through rates is a noisy signal that they use to infer a match. And that they're going to update beliefs based on click-through rates and thus affect their subsequent decisions. That's the basic game. So this is really the only modeling slide unless you want me to jump into depth, but advertiser A considers each site S at week W with known daily impressions of traffic T and chooses the duration of the ad buy X in terms of days for a particular price for that site week as a function of the number of days X. By the way, this is, I give props to Jason Bruce. That looks like a University of Texas color, but he's figured out what color palette works for people who are colorblind. And he's adapted his presentation formats to ensure that they render well for people who are colorblind, which I think is such a cool idea. Anyway, so I use it too now. So the net value of an X day subscription is site S starting in week W. This is off the shelf model from economics, cost elasticity model. But basically, we say advertiser value is a function of 2 things. First is the cost, the price you pay. Right, so the first thing you should note, this isn't a dollar metric. It's basically a profit function, and we can interpret this in dollars. Then we're going to back out sort of the value in dollar terms of advertising, and we're going to say that we're going to have diminishing marginal returns. And when I say TS is total traffic, X is the duration of the ad buy. So this gives me the total number of impressions. So the longer the impressions, the less, more impressions, less value. And the zeta maps the diminishing marginal return. That's the basic idea. So far, so good. But we're going to allow an advertiser site match function. Okay, and this match function is going to either raise or lower the potential match of the value I get from advertising. That's what I want to learn. Again, given the time, I'm not going to go into the details of the advertiser site match function, except at this stage to note that it's a function of my beliefs about this noisy signal and click-through rates. So what am I going to infer? The prior beliefs on click-through rates. I should also add that this function is going to control for all sorts of fixed effects and trend type things. So that's where all those controls are out. So just as a thought check, if advertising is 0, then the price paid is 0 and the valuation is 0. So this is all normalized against 0 valuation. Finally, the click-through rate signal the advertiser match in function F. And we're going to parameterize the initial priors on the click-through rates, which is the number of clicks over the number of impressions, as a beta distribution. We're going to parameterize the beta distribution such the expected clicks are going to be given by gamma. It's from gamma. I'm going to estimate this initial click-through. And then of course, what's conjugate with beta is the binomial. So I'm going to use binomial updating. The idea is that once I observe a certain number of clicks over impressions, I can update and get my posterior. And the important thing here is the more information in the limit as the number of impressions go up, this approaches the true click-through rate. To see how this works, we put it all together here. So the prior match beliefs are I'll give my CTIL, let's click the rate, we're gonna estimate those. But then I observe a set of initial advertising choices conditioned on those beliefs. And then I realize as an advertiser, I realize a certain number of clicks for those impressions. That's the signal. I update my match beliefs based on that information. Now I have a new set of match beliefs and I can update my subsequent choices. That's where we are. It's ongoing.
Learning about the quality of a site, right, can influence other sites. For example, if I know the quality of a site, sports site, probably I learn also something about other sports. Right? I don't learn something about that.
That's
related.
It's a fantastic question. I should have been more close. We, our prior, we're gonna estimate at the advertiser level. So, but then we're gonna let them learn at the site level. So the assumption that the advertiser has an initial set of beliefs that are common across sites. By the way, we relax that assumption, and it turns out there's very little evidence that their beliefs are different across sites. Like, why wouldn't they? Think about it in the absence of information. But, yeah.
You have a budget constraint?
Yes and no. So we don't observe a budget constraint, but we do some analyses where we actually impute a budget constraint as max spend. And so as it turns out, right, the more you limit in the advertiser spend, and not surprisingly, the more advertising spend goes down to zero. And that will become important later when we think about in a counterfactual scenario, how much you constrain advertisers depends on how much gain they can improve, because if you constrain their ability to advertise, the gain they can constrain gets smaller. The interesting question though is always like, why would this budget constraint exist? There's a lot of debate, good reasons to believe it does, and a lot of good reasons to believe it doesn't. If it's profitable to advertise, sort of the arguments on why we, yeah.
A different question. So if they're learning and they're optimally learning, they would choose the high variance uncertainty ones, right? And you're not assuming they're kind of forward-looking.
So
Maybe they're not, I don't know.
let me see if I can address that. We thought about that. And obviously it's very hard to estimate a forward-looking dynamic discrete choice model. Those of you who've tuned them know they can be kind of squirrely. Ariel Takis' student had a really cool idea. He said, just replace that value function with UCB. And UCB, we know, has really good regret properties, very close to optimal. So we do that to allow, and what do we find? No difference in model fit or priors, as it turns out, but we can actually get a measure on the dollar value of test and learn. And it turns out it's roughly 0.2% of typical subscription price. It's just that these advertisers, I'm not saying people don't know, it's just these advertisers don't appear. But I thought that trick for those who looked up by Chow is pretty nifty. It's a really cool idea.
So you think they're not carefully selecting what to subscribe to based on uncertainty?
Yeah, that's what I think. Ollie?
Good question. So these things, people can actually make new choices before they have ran out of the subscription from the previous one, right?
Yeah.
Before it actually ends.
Yeah.
I forego the learning.
Yeah.
Does it tell you something? Is it captured in this model?
No, we just assume all the value gains accrues at the time. If you make the choice based on your expectation time that subscription. So if it's 3 weeks, we assume the choice is made based on those impressions.
Okay, so if I make a choice before the impressions end, I don't learn, or versus I wait till the end, I don't learn anything.
Yeah.
Oh,
So, yeah,
So the learning about match value is based on clicks.
yes.
So the fact whether I like the clicks I get is not part of it, right? So I may get a lot of clicks, but they are useless clicks. So
Yes. But here's the interesting thing, and that question actually segues really nicely in this model fit. So, if we're modeling the process well, we should get some pretty good fit on how advertisers spend in practice. And we do. On the x-axis is observed spend, and we're using MCMC, so that's why you see on the left-hand axis posterior predicted spend, and then line up beautifully. Does a really good job of prediction. Now you might be looking at the zero and going, what's going on here? But remember, spending is constrained to be positive. So we've got this sort of truncated situation where we're trying to predict zero spend, but the model predicts more than zero spend. It has to be positive. So, but we still get a good cluster at zero. You know, and for these errors, they're not too far off from zero. So the model fit is actually pretty good for our learning model. And now for the super interesting part, in my opinion. So here on the x-axis, I have observed click-through rate. So the way to read this is I'm going to order advertisers from the one with the lowest belief about how well their ads work. Okay, this is a very pessimistic advertiser. So this blue dot means that their click-through rate is really low, 0.001%. These are the actual observed click-through rates from when they advertised. This guy's pessimistic. At the top, we have somebody who believes that they're going to get a 1% click-through rate, and this is what actually happened. Some are optimistic, some are pessimistic. This plays out the whole distribution. But the interesting thing is, here's the beliefs. The median belief is the vertical blue bar. The median realization is the vertical orange bar. And that suggests advertisers are optimistic. They think their ads will work too well. And then, you know, think about it, if you go back to the raw data, the fact they start with 6, then with 3, unless they're forward-looking, right? That has to be explained by an optimistic buyer. So this raises a really interesting and thorny question. Why would the platform and publishers ever want to fix this problem? So I'm going to go deeper in that in a moment. This is a time series, it's not time series, like total accumulated impressions by advertisers running from 10,000 to 10 million. And this is the change in expected match values normalized to 1 at the start. And what you can see is each line traces a specific advertiser's belief over time from their initial belief. So some are revising upwards, those are in blue. Many are revising downwards. Actually, the blue means they used the site again. The orange means they didn't use the site again. So basically, if they're not using the site again, they're not getting the advertising they want, they tend to drift down in their beliefs. But so most advertisers are drifting down in their prior beliefs over time. And again, this is on a log scale. So this is how advertiser priors are being revised as time goes on. Okay, so now I want to go to the counterfactual questions in the remaining 10 minutes. And the question here is, what if advertisers knew their match before advertising on a new site? I'd really love to know the economic consequences of this. How much would their ad buys change? And interestingly, what are the welfare profit implications for advertisers, sites, and the ad network? I can see this playing out 2 ways. As I mentioned, an advertiser is going to strictly be better off with information. But sites and ad network is less clear. So on the one hand, these advertisers are optimistic. So if I inform them that they're over optimistic, they're going to cut their spending. But that said, it's hard to find good match. So on the flip side, because I know if I can tell them what sites work really well, if I can find a mechanism to help them revise their priors, it might be through a sort of matching, I got more welfare gains. Efficient, the publishers are better off, platforms better off, than the advertisers better off. So the question is, if I'm going to do that, what approach could possibly be used to better inform advertisers? What would be the mechanisms? And this is the information pulling approach we're going to use. We use the Google Vision API, and the basic idea here is we have information on the ads. So this is a sample ad. We don't have much advertiser information, but if I run this image through Google Image API, I'm going to get these 10 tags. Pretty good, actually. And so the logic here is, okay, if BMW has an ad and Mercedes has an ad, they should look pretty much the same. And if BMW does well on a site, so should Mercedes. And so with that in mind, I can set my prior click-through rate to the posterior click-through rates for similar advertisers that I've already observed in the data. And I can compute the cosine similarity between the ads image tags to create similarity rates across advertisers. When I do this, I can take a weighted sum of click-through rates, where these are my competitors' click-through rates, and the weights are how similar that competitor is to me. And I'm going to use that to replace the prior the mistaken prior that an advertiser has. And what's really nifty about this, which shocked me, is how well this worked. I never expected this, but on the x-axis, I have predicted click-through rates. On the y, based on the similarity-based measure, and by predicted, I mean when an advertiser enters to a site the first time, is their click-through rate actually reflecting the weighted average of like? And it turns out the predicted versus observed lines up on a 45-degree line almost perfectly. So this actually works really well. And the platform owns all the information they need to do this. The platform owns all the ad images, they own the click-through rates. It's easy for them to say, even automate this prior process. So with that in mind,
An intuition why the confidence interval grow as click-through rate increases.
sorry, Tiffany?
An intuition on why the confidence intervals are increasing as they predict the click-through rate.
Fewer observations. So we do this counterfactual. What we do is we replace advertiser priors with a forecasted priors. And we say, what would happen to advertiser welfare? And the headline here is the advertiser welfare increases by nearly $3,000 and their ad spend goes up by $671. So what I have here is change in total spend at the on the x-axis. Advertisers ranked from least change in total spend to most change in total spend. So a couple of them cut advertising, neither near the center. This just blows up the middle, and you can see some increase quite a bit. But we use median because it's sort of the most stable statistic, and that's how we compute. So it looks like advertisers are better off. That's nice. We knew they'd be better off, but we didn't know how much. So it's really cool to see exactly how much their ignorance or asymmetric information is affecting them. Then I'm going to look at, the informative things are 1 and 2 here. So the median advertiser just dropped 0.2 publishers. So the way to read this is, there were about 55 advertisers who didn't drop a single publisher. There were about 30 advertisers who dropped 1 publisher. So they're not dropping too many publishers. What they're doing is, here the mode is at 0, 1, 2. So about 40 advertisers added 2 publishers. This is evidence of better matching, right? They tend to be finding, because you're telling them what sites work, and they tend to be finding better advertisers. That suggests there might be some hope for the platform and the publishers.
Just a clarification, is this with endogenous price adjustments or is it on the allocation?
There's 2 supply side considerations. I have to what, 255? Yeah. 2 supply side considerations come up to me. One is crowd, right? So if the publisher looks really well, I didn't expect advertisers to crowd, click the rates. Turns out in the counterfactual scenario, we never see more than 2 advertisers on a given site. And when they are, they're rotated, top and bottom. And you think about it, it works differently than Exchange, because an ad shows for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and users come to sites very often. They're gonna see ads. This is like, so that's why I don't think crowding's too bad. The second thing in pricing homogeneity is, so we looked at price menus, and what we did was we tried to ingress pricing on the total number of impressions, including site week components displays about 1% of additional log price variation. The more important thing is that this term adds virtually nothing. It's because we don't see advertisers change prices over time. And when I regress advertiser fixed effects on the total number of advertisers, that doesn't explain anything. If you think about ad prices are set based more on the readership profile than the number of advertisers that arrive in the week. So that's why I think they're pretty common. So we're not seeing a lot on the pricing side.
You prove that the prices are not correlated.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I don't think it's that unusual. Only from the standpoint, again, that prices are set more based on overall leadership. And I have a lot of capacity.
It's an auction marketplace, so the rest of the ads and if the clicks are, should be effects in the end that good websites make more money per click.
So what happens to publisher welfare? So I'm gonna, again, plot publishers, and this was the one with the least gain in publisher welfare, all the way to one with the most gain in publisher welfare. And so the fascinating thing to me is, first off, the median is 9,618. So publishers actually do pretty well over the duration of our data. Every single one of them has a positive outcome from this sort of matching. So this sort of matching completely dominates the, the optimism. So publishers are better off. Related to that, the median publisher lost about 3.1 advertisers in the counterfactual scenario. The way I'm going to read this is, here's a given publisher. So basically one publisher lost one advertiser. Here I can see that there was 3 publishers that lost, advertisers lost. Yeah, so 3 publishers lost 1 advertiser. The mode's right here. 6 publishers lost 3 advertisers. But on the flip side, look at what they gained. The mode's here at 9. So over the duration of the data, 5 publishers gained 9 advertisers. So like the gains dwarf the losses. And it does seem to spread out across advertisers because there's so many, which may be another reason that the pricing pressure isn't so high. So if I conclude, any more questions before I jump to summary? Yeah.
To estimate how much we could make by optimizing this. The opposite, you can say you can change the prices, right? So
Yeah, in theory, right? You could do that, I think. If one wanted to play with the supply side. But that assumes publishers don't know what they're doing, which may be true. They're not all big.
it might be interesting, what is more valuable, the information or pricing?
Yeah. So back to the basic research question. And Nils has a paper, I think, with Steve Fidelis. I think it's fantastic. It shows when advertisers have information, they do a much better job. This is very strong in an experimental setting, unlike us. Very strong evidence. But aside from that, I'm aware of very little research in marketing or economics that looks at advertiser test and learned behavior, let alone quantifies the effect. So I think there's some important lessons here for my own personal vantage point. So do advertisers learn which publisher sites to select? It appears so. Are their initial match beliefs correct? No, they seem optimistic. Is there an approach or way to fix this problem? The answer is, should be pretty easy to run all this stuff through Google Vision APIs and use this to determine better priors. And if you do that, it looks like about a 16% increase in advertiser value. Comes out of that, but the publishers do even better because advertisers just can't find good matches. So it really helps on the publisher side. And if I tally up across advertisers and publishers over the duration of their day from our sample, we're looking at nearly $500,000 more than the platform could have made, which I think is, at the end of the day, is a nifty little gain for very little cost because it seems pretty easy. So that is all I've got in 2 minutes. Or any more questions? Found Dave still on his computer. All right, thank you.
Thank you all for having me. I'm really delighted to be speaking to you all. So this paper, to kind of give the sort of brutally short summary of it, they look at advertiser learning in specific setting of the direct buy ad network. They first document very compelling evidence descriptive of advertiser learning. They incorporate the structural model, then talk about welfare. Sort of high level, if you induce these interventions that improve information on the ex-ante priors, there's evidence this is good for advertisers, for publishers, in the network. So that's kind of, there's a lot in this paper. That's, I think, sort of like the sort of distilling it down to the few core results. So At a high level, I'm a big fan of this paper. You sort of think about what ingredients the top paper should have. This has all of them. It has fantastic questions. The data is terrific. And also the analyses are just very carefully executed. You can see the sort of level of attention to detail that Carlos and co-authors have put through here to deliver this. This is just a great work. In some sense, one of sort of my concerns with the paper is there's so much in it that it's easy to lose sight of some of the gems that are inside of it. So for example, particularly I want to call out what Carl mentioned towards the end there, this Google Cloud Image API idea, I think is just super awesome and is something which managers and us as researchers should really think about leveraging going forward. So you're designing a new ad, you want to think about how effective it is. Using tools like this, I think is a great way to actually sort of inform your priors. And I don't sort of want that sort of the baby to be thrown out the bathwater, sort of lose sight of ideas like that, talking about the broader findings. So I'm an assistant professor now, but before coming to academia, I worked at Facebook for about 7 years. And this is a little bit, sort of going to lead more into that background here in discussing this paper. And part of the goal of this discussion arguably might be more for the audience than for Carl. And I want to think about sort of some of what I saw in industry. Now I think this paper can lay the groundwork for a lot of great research agendas going forward. So the first kind of idea I want to mention is that this advertiser learning problem is just massively important and very understudied. So Carl mentioned that I have a paper on advertiser learning, and when we were working on that, we realized there's just very little academic work on this. At the same time, a lot of digital advertising today is actually sort of built around this problem. So for example, at least sort of the world I was in at Facebook, one thing you saw across time was that more and more decision rights were being shifted from the advertiser side to the platform side across time. And a main motivation for this was the advertiser learning. So Facebook, for example, would see that advertisers would start on the platform. They would kind of know what the advertiser should do to be successful. They'd see the advertiser would not do that, then drop off the platform. When you'd survey them, you'd say, oh yeah, this product doesn't work. And so, as Carl mentioned, there's sort of different theories for why the platform might want to correct this or not. But empirically, Meta and other platforms have really wanted to, sort of consistent with the Carl's results, to sort of help solve this problem, to reduce churn, to increase ad spend. And you can see this in many different aspects of ad delivery. So for example, ad delivery on a lot of the platforms is dictated by optimization. So the advertiser says, here's my target audience, then Meta, Google, Amazon, and so forth say, well, we'll use our own data to actually sort of inform who within that target audience is actually a good match for your ads. Right? So instead of relying on the advertiser to make this decision up front, this company takes that decision and optimizes it using all their data. This also happens with the bidding. So the advertisers can specify some high-level details about how they bid. Under the hood in every single auction, the platforms weight those bids, they paste them, they do all sorts of changes that are sort of removing those decisions from the advertiser side. The latest iteration of these are actually sort of now using Gen I. So advertisers can create ads, and Facebook will say, well, actually, if you change your creative to be like this, if you change your text to be like this is how it will actually be more effective. So again, this is sort of taking more and more problems from the advertiser side, moving them to sort of the better informed side of the house. You might think about welfare implications, how this could be good or bad. I just want to highlight that a lot of how advertising happens today is in large part because of this learning problem, because it's a really hard thing for new advertisers to think about, and that affects a lot of ad spend today. So I don't want sort of you in the audience to think, oh, there's like this paper on learning, this stone has been overturned, there's nothing left to do here. This is like a really massively important area, and the counterfactuals to consider are great. There's sort of one step in like a much broader research agenda here. So flagging this, I think, is a great area for future research. The second point, I think one of the great things about this paper compared to say my paper is you can actually estimate the prior and think about how overly optimistic are advertisers. And I think it's sort of worth stepping back and thinking about, why do we live in a world where advertisers have such massively optimistic priors? I'll add that, they see this in their data. We run surveys on Facebook where we ask advertisers, how effective do you think your ads are? What's sort of the minimum effectiveness for you to actually advertise? And when you compare that to how effective they actually are, there's just this like massive disconnect. And, sort of why are we in this world? There are many possible reasons. In sort of practice, one thing I saw when I was in the industry was that there frankly just a lot of sort of junk science out there. You look at a lot of the industry conferences that talk about measuring advertising effectiveness, very few academics speak at them, and there's just a lot of, frankly, garbage out there. And further, there's a sort of coordination problem where some of the platforms, if sort of you're Amazon, for example, you might want to switch your measurement to talk about incrementality, but all the other platforms are not. Are you really going to be a first mover and make your ads look much less good than all these other platforms? So I think there's sort of some coordination issues here that sort of help reinforce the incorrect priors that then are having welfare implications. So I think understanding where these priors come from, how we as academics could try to improve this, I think is a great area and highly impactful, particularly on the industry side, to think about going forward. The last point I want to mention is a sort of plea for the consumer side. So my prior is that with this learning, if you see improvements for advertisers, publishers, for the network, probably this is also good for users, right? Like they're probably seeing better ads that they engage with more. You might have been freaked out by them. There might be sort of other welfare effects. But this sort of consumer side of the story has greatly been missing from the narrative. And in practice, this is an area with just massive regulatory thrash right now. And in an absence of evidence, a lot of regulation is being made, assuming any increase in personalization is actually a privacy violation. Then you can think about how costly privacy violations might be, and regulators tend to assume they're very costly. And so I think, one direction to go in going forward that would have a lot of impact, particularly on the regulatory standpoint, is getting to this consumer question. And so I'm guilty of this in some of my papers. I'm only focusing on the advertiser side, but to the extent that you can talk about, are there any revealed preference measures? Can you look at repeated purchases, returns, satisfactions? Even if the consumer welfare question is hard to pin down, I think triangulating it through sources is sort of a very promising venue for future research. So that's sort of what I want to highlight for you three. I want to highlight these sort of three main avenues for future research. So thinking about other aspects of learning, why we have these informed priors, and thinking about the consumer side. I view this paper as just a fantastic starting point for what hopefully will be a sort of long stream of literature on these topics. So thank you.
Actually, I do one time. What you might not know is Nils is teaching you prep right now. So not only did he take time from that to think through the issues we could make him write the commentary, but he literally left his class, flew out here, has taken a late night flight back with only 2 hours of sleep to teach again. I just think it's a really nice tutorial. And maybe because I'm old, I'm saying this was a really nice tutorial on how as a field and community we pull together to help each other out, that level of care, dedication, and execution.
Thank you, Nils.